The SEC has elected to move to a 9-game conference schedule in football. Here's why they should move to a 20-game schedule in SEC basketball. Welcome into this edition of the Barn Hoops Podcast. I am your host, Jacob Hillman. Happy game day as Auburn football takes on Baylor later on tonight at 7 o'clock Central. Obviously, we're going to have so much coverage about that right here at the Barn Auburn Podcast Network on YouTube, as well as wherever you find your podcast. So be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, as the Top Button Podcast with Kyle Rush, a.k.a. Charlie 5, and Village Vice with Brad Law and Zach Backerby. We'll have all of the happenings in week one of Auburn and Baylor covered this weekend. But what we're going to talk about is why the SEC should move to a 20-game model for SEC basketball. Last week, it was announced that the SEC was moving to 9 conference games in 2026 and beyond for SEC football, which is, in my opinion, the correct step and exactly what should have happened several years ago with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma. And finally, they're making that decision to move towards that, as it allows teams to play each other at least once every other year, and you get to visit every campus every 4 years. So a big step in the right direction. It also secures traditional rivalries. There's 3 permanent opponents with 6 rotating on and off the schedule every single year. So I think the model that the SEC has gone to with football, it doesn't necessarily reflect what I'm about to propose for SEC basketball, but it's closer to the same deal, where you have your traditional rivals and opponents that are permanent, that you play home and away every year, and then you're still playing other teams that rotate off of that home and away rotation and get to see different venues every year. And really, this is also to set the standard for the rest of college basketball. This is something that I think some conferences are shying away from. You look at the ACC, they made the announcement earlier this summer that they would be going back to a 18-game model going into the 2025-26 season, which the ACC is really the powerhouse conference all time in college basketball. Obviously has fallen off a little bit. The SEC has taken that crown at this point, but that's exactly why it should set the standard. It should be the leading conference here to move to 20 games and make that consistent. And today we're going to talk about why and how it should be done, because I think that there is this thought that college basketball and SEC basketball just can't compete at all with SEC and college football. While it's not going to match the ratings, it's not going to match the eyeballs, the attendance, whatever it is, the revenue, it still can work at the same time as the SEC and the college football playoff, those bowl games, everything that's going on in that December to January window when these games would have to be played. And I just think that we are in a position where you look at these TV contracts, you look at revenue share, you look at what these players want to do with their careers, and it's important to give them the best product. We're going to talk about something Mark Pope proposed to Matt Norlander of CBS Sports, and really just take a look at the ACC model of how it executed the 20-game schedule over the last couple of decades when it was playing 20 conference games. But starting with why this is important, and it starts with the fans and the fan base. And if you look at these schedules that take place in November and December, especially with the movement towards these insanely difficult non-conference schedules, and we'll touch on that in a moment as well, the home schedule is not as good. You look at what Auburn is doing. Auburn is playing in the Players Era Festival in Las Vegas, not a home game. Auburn is playing number 1 Houston, potentially number 1 Houston in Birmingham. And Houston last year, while those are close to home, not a home game. Auburn is playing another potential number 1 in Purdue in Indianapolis, and it was in Birmingham last year. Holiday Hoopsgiving, the annual Holiday Hoopsgiving, Auburn will be playing Chattanooga this year in Atlanta. And again, it's a unique position for Auburn with the way ticket demand is for Neville Arena, and Coach Pearl and his staff want to make sure they go to these larger venues and spread out across the region in the Southeast to give all of the Auburn family a chance to witness their program and see these teams in action. But I do think, and Auburn does get NC State at home this year, but that's a part of the SEC ACC challenges. That's a home and away deal. That's set in stone. And we're going to get Arizona at home next year. But I think it'd be great if you see more than one game inside your home arena before Christmas happens, whether that's an SEC game or another power conference game. It would be great to see. So I think for the fans, it's just a better product on the floor. Again, you also end up gelling together more. You play a critical game earlier on your schedule, whether that's early December, whether that's just a couple of days earlier, right before the new year. Whatever it is, it forces a team to really figure things out and get together. And I think for the players, going to Mark Pope's point, Mark Pope told Matt Norlander of CBS Sports that he wants to go to a 40-game overall schedule, so non-conference and conference, with 24 SEC games. I think it's a little bit overboard. I think that's an aggressive model. And you know what? I mean, maybe I wouldn't be against it if I were able to see it all shake out. But one of the points he makes several of the same points I'm making, but one I didn't think of were these players that are eventually going to be in the NBA, professional leagues, wherever it is, and how much longer the NBA schedule is than the college schedule. Right now, it's a 31-game schedule. In 26 to 27, it will move to a 32-game schedule overall for college basketball. But right now, you're playing 31 games, which in the NBA, you've played 31 games by the All-Star break. And Mark Pope made the point that when he got in the NBA, it wore him down. It really did make a difference. And I think that this could really translate for players when they make that jump to the next level, to the association, of being ready to play for 82 games. And hopefully it would help with injuries and just stamina and fatigue, whatever it is. We're not to see as much injuries when they do get to the league. And then for the conference and TV, I simply think you can put these games on TV versus putting Auburn and Monmouth or Georgia State or whoever it is on SEC Plus. You put these games on linear television, and they're going to generate eyeballs because it's the first look at these teams in conference action, which is just a huge deal. That you know how excited, especially if it's a school that didn't have a great football season, they're going to be pumped to see their basketball team. You know Kentucky's going to be watching their first SEC game, especially if it's against a big name opponent like a Tennessee or an Auburn or an Alabama, whoever it is. The fans will be tuned in and they will be watching, and that's good for TV. And that leads me into the how. How does this happen? And really, it's figuring out the dates and how to do this. When you look at the ACC schedules, I'm looking at Duke's from last year when ACC was still playing 20 games. And its schedule, so played Auburn on December 4th, Wednesday, in Cameron Indoor Stadium. Then the Blue Devils had a road trip to Louisville, to the KFC Yum Center for their first ACC game of the season. So Duke was 1-0 in the ACC on December 8th. That the ACC doesn't seem to care. I guess maybe it does now since it's moving away from the model, but I think that has more to do with the strength of its conference and the teams in it than it does anything else. But it was on a Sunday at 6 o'clock Central, right there head to head with the NFL and some of the biggest games that it would be played. And then Duke would host Incarnate Word and George Mason before going back on the road to face Georgia Tech on December 21st, which was a Saturday. And this is before Christmas. Before Christmas, the ACC has already played 2 games throughout its conference. And you go and look more so at the back half of Duke's schedule, and it randomly goes up to Madison Square Garden and plays Illinois on February 22nd. So it's very interesting to see how that schedule shook out. And as an SEC fan, it's kind of funny because those pop up, it seems, every year. And I don't think anything of it until I get to that February 20th, February 21st. Oh, let's see who's Duke. But why are they playing Illinois at MSG? And it's simply because of the open date, and they'd rather keep the flow of things going and play and not wait, not have an 8-day layoff between the Virginia and Miami game and go and get big ratings on Fox because Illinois also has an off day. It works out perfectly. And the SEC obviously used to have somewhat of that same model with the Big 12 Challenge mixed in there towards the end of January. But this was a one-off. This was just Duke and Illinois saying, hey, we've got this Saturday off. Let's go play in MSG because Duke is that kind of power. It's a little bit different. And that's not necessarily to say every SEC team will need to go schedule a non-conference game in February because that would be impossible. But you can eliminate that open date. And that's the first way to really accomplish this 20-game SEC schedule is to simply eliminate the open date and start a few days earlier. So, one, eliminate the open date. That's as simple as that. Here's the thing. The SEC didn't really have that open date until very recently, until the Big 12 Challenge was eliminated. That open date did not exist. So, you technically got an open date from SEC competition, but you were still playing basketball. And starting earlier, simply, you'd be going head-to-head with college football bowl season. Okay? That's tough, but I don't think it should prevent you from setting the standard in college basketball that it should be. If you're the toughest league in America, play 20 games. And I think that's why the SEC needs to do that and just start a little bit earlier. That's the first option. That's probably the easiest option. But I don't think it's the best option. My next option is to eliminate the open date. Once again, I think that is a very simple way to do it. But maybe these coaches, maybe a league likes to have that for these teams to heal their bumps and bruises after they've played a grueling few games and whatnot, just to get ready to get back on the road to playing good basketball. That's fine. But I still think eliminate the open date and you open SEC action on the Saturday of Army-Navy, or even that Sunday, but specifically that Saturday of Army-Navy when that's the only college football game on. And yes, there's a lot of eyeballs on that, but I don't think any SEC fan that cares a lick about its basketball program would hesitate to turn on their basketball game over Army-Navy. And again, that's only 3 hours of the day. You've got you start games at 11 a.m. and then you wrap it up at 7 o'clock. And sure, it might go head-to-head with the Heisman ceremony, but again, you're only going to be competing with those fans that might have a participant in the Heisman ceremony. I don't think that's a big deal. And again, this gives fans something to look forward to at home before Christmas, a chance to go to their arena. And obviously, if it's a road game, so be it. But just depends on how it shakes out. It gives fans a chance to go and see a power conference game, an interconference game before Christmas. And I think the biggest counter argument I could think against this, besides, you're competing with college football, it's too early, whatever. I don't think that's as big of a deal as it might be made out to be. I do think students not being in class or class not being in session, that could spark kind of that's a dull environment because not everywhere's like Auburn, not everywhere's like the jungle where you'll have a lot of students return for that game. And even if you don't fill up the student section, there's a great system for fans to get down inside the jungle and they're going to be rowdy because there's going to be enough students there to at least lead that charge. And it's still going to be a great environment. That's probably not the case at South Carolina. That's probably not the case at LSU in the shape it's in right now. And it's probably not even the case at a Georgia or Alabama with the football programs being as strong as they are at this point. So, sure, I see that argument. I understand it. I don't think it matters enough where you can go in and go ahead and get a game in for the conference season so you can play 20 SEC games. The other option is still playing that Saturday of Army-Navy, but then you just pick another random date before Christmas, whether that's the Saturday this upcoming year. Auburn's playing Purdue on December 20th in Indianapolis. Why not play that? Why not that be an SEC game? Why can't it be? It can be, but the SEC elects not to. And I think that getting that to be that second SEC game date of the year just really would elevate the product that the SEC is putting on the court, and every program is as well. It gives the fans a lot more fun to do before Christmas. And of course, it's a good, now let's put it this way. at least Auburn is playing these strong non-conference games and it has the strongest non-conference schedule in the country. But you look at the announcement of Holiday Hoopsgiving, and it's Chattanooga. It's a little underwhelming. No offense to the Mocs program, but it's not that high major program that we're used to seeing come in. Now, of course, we saw rumors circulate about, is St. Mary's going to be that team, or is it going to be Miami? And it ends up being Chattanooga. Of course, you look at the last few years of Auburn in Atlanta and Holiday Hoopsgiving and what it did to Nebraska, what it did to Indiana, and what it did most recently to Ohio State. And no wonder a high major program doesn't want to come to Auburn's, pretty much backyard and play Bruce Pearl and the Tigers inside State Farm Arena. They don't want to be embarrassed, and I get that. But that could be an SEC game where there's no choice for these teams but to play, and it's a much better product than what I presume will be an Auburn blowout at Chattanooga in Atlanta on December 13th. So that's really my case and how you do it. Here's the thing. You look at the SEC football schedule, you still got that cupcake Saturday in November before rivalry week. Why can't the SEC play conference games in the midst of its non-conference schedule? I don't see a reason against it. And again, I'm not saying to go do what Duke did last year and play Illinois late in February in New York. That's because Duke's Duke. But yeah, I just think that you're able to have a similar model to the previous ACC model where early December is your preview of what the SEC is going to be like in January, February, and March. And I just don't think there's really too many negatives. And again, I want to reiterate that this needs to be the SEC setting the standard as the premier conference in college basketball. That far and away right now, the SEC is the best, is the most talented, and is setting records and all kinds of numbers. But it needs to be more than that. I think what Greg Sankey did last week with the football schedule moving to 9 games was the exact right decision. It needs to be the fact that Auburn is playing Alabama and Georgia every year, and it doesn't go more than 2 years without playing a Florida and LSU, a Tennessee, so on. And in basketball, Auburn should be playing Alabama and Georgia and Ole Miss home and away every year. But then it should also get 2 rotating home and away opponents where there might be a year that Auburn is playing Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and Florida home and away. Sure, it's a tough schedule, but that's what the Tigers have earned with the prestige of their program. And that's the same deal. Kentucky, I can't recall the permanent opponents off the top of my head for them, but I imagine it's probably Tennessee and maybe Florida. So if they're playing Tennessee, Florida, and maybe Vanderbilt just for the scheduling balance purpose of the exercise, they should play those 3 every single year home and away. And then they can have a schedule one year where it's those 3 plus Auburn and Alabama home and away. That's what the fans want to see. They want to see more of that and less of Auburn and Monmouth and so on. Those games they're good for the team. They're good for coaches. They're good for players to work their way up in early November. But I think once you've hit December, it's time to start stepping it up and playing some of these conference games and really getting into the what is truly college basketball season. And like I said, props to Auburn because it is absolutely playing the toughest non-conference schedule in college basketball, at least in the top 5 of toughest non-conference schedules. So it's being tested. That's good, but that's not the case for every program. And I don't have a non-conference schedule in front of me, but you look at someone like Oklahoma who went into SEC play undefeated. And I think its first SEC game was at Alabama, and I think there were folks that thought, could Oklahoma sneak up on Alabama? And it absolutely could not, because it was undefeated against a ton of non-conference teams that were not good. And Alabama was, an Elite 8 caliber team and took it to them in Coleman Coliseum. So that really is just my whole point of why the SEC needs to move to 20 conference games. I think it's so much better when that early December slate, man, oh, wow, you look at Saturday, Auburn's got Ole Miss coming up here in Neville Arena on December 6th or whenever it is. That's exciting. That is exciting. Now, like I said, you don't want to compete with the SEC championship in football or any actual SEC football games. But listen, if it's a bowl game or anything like that, I think the SEC basketball is right there where you're going to get enough eyeballs on it to make it worthwhile. You're still going to sell out arenas where you would sell out. Neville Arena is going to sell out. Rupp Arena is going to sell out. Bud Walton Arena is going to sell out. The O-Dome in Gainesville is going to sell out. Thompson Bowling is going to sell out. Those are all going to sell. I don't know if Alabama Coleman Coliseum will sell out, but, they're going to have enough fans there. And like I said, I just think that this is the way for the SEC to really put its foot down and be the conference in college basketball, and that's how it does it. So let me know what you think. How would you move to 20 SEC games? Would you do it at all? Do you think 18 is enough? I don't think it is, because I think, again, like SEC football, you've got to maintain those traditional rivals, and you want to play teams home and away every year. I don't think that. I think an SEC schedule looks a lot more fun when you have Kentucky home and away on top of Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss, and then you also throw in an LSU home and away, or whoever it is, like a trip down to the Bayou. So I just think it's way better for the fans. I think the product would improve, and I just think that it would solidify SEC as the best college basketball conference in the nation. Once again, happy game day as Auburn and Baylor are going to show down tonight in Waco, Texas. I'll be part of the Auburn Sports Network crew out in Waco alongside Brown Law of Village Vice. And he and Zach will cover it all on Village Vice later this weekend, early next week. And Kyle Rush will have your immediate reaction on the Top Button podcast. So be sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and be ready for all the reaction from Auburn and Baylor tonight. And then we'll continue to talk about, we're still expecting that non-conference schedule to be officially announced by Auburn men's basketball here. Who knows when, but that should be coming out any minute today or any day now. And we'll look at it. We'll look at the entire schedule and where we think Auburn, how many games it can win, what the record can be, what's the toughest stretch throughout the year. We've got to start to piece it together, but whenever we officially see it, it'll be much easier to see it. Once again, thank you so much for watching or listening wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube, however you do it. Click that subscribe button. And once again, have a great weekend, a great Labor Day weekend. Stay safe. And thanks for tuning in to the Barn Hoops podcast.